Hello friends, my name is Emile, and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps, and welcome to the final part of our sports car quadrilogy. Today we are finally taking a look at the ultimate sports cars. We start with the McLaren 570S, 562 horsepower, 442 foot-pounds of torque, 3,016 pounds of weight. The McLaren 570S, of course, developed to go toe-to-toe with the higher tier Porsche 911s, along with a few other bits and bobs in this sort of category. And while it has been beaten by the ugly stick a little bit, I cannot deny the McLaren has some pretty impressive statistics. Power to weight ratio is certainly pretty good. It's also one of two mid-engined rear drive cars here today. As far as actually driving the 570S goes, the prevailing sort of thing with this car is understeer, which is quite surprising. This car is actually quite notorious here in this game for being rather understeery. I don't know if that is sort of intentional understeer, like with the Renault Clio Phase 2, in order to avoid it going to a ditch or anything like that. But this car is well known for its understeeriness. Other than that, the actual car itself drives absolutely fine. It does stick its power to the road relatively well for a sort of high-powered mid-engined car. Usually these do have a lot of issues with traction. The 570S doesn't really have that, so I don't know if that's sort of partly the understeer's advantage, but you do need to be aware of that when you're lobbing this car around. From a calculated Brit to a very, very mad German car we go to the Mercedes-Benz SL65 AMG Black. 661 horsepower, 738 foot-pound of torque, 4,215 pounds. Unsurprisingly, this is the most powerful car here today, the torquiest car here today, and the heaviest vehicle here today. And still saying those statistics, even almost a decade on, following this car's launch, is absolutely insane. The SL65 Black is a mental machine, and I simultaneously love it and hate it. Yeah, crazy contraption, more torque than Othma H1, Mercedes-Benz G65. It is an incredible car, this. As far as actually driving it goes, it's okay. It's very fun, it's very fast, there's no denying that. You do feel the heaviness in this vehicle. It does weigh a hell of a lot, you know, 4,215 pounds, unsurprisingly heaviest car here today by a fair margin. And you do really feel that weight. It also has a bit of an effect on the brakes. The braking on this car isn't the best. They're kind of iffy on the brakes. Another issue, which to be fair doesn't affect this car all that much, but it is worth mentioning, this car does only come with a 5-speed gearbox. Luckily it has so much torque and power that shouldn't really be a disadvantage, but it is worth talking about. But the SL65, you don't really drive it for the handling, you drive it because it's crazy. If you wanted to drive a Mercedes, that's a little bit more sensible though. They have you covered with this, the Mercedes-AMG GTS, 503 horsepower, 479 foot-pound of torque, 3,573 pounds of weight. Of course, this is Mercedes-AMG's latest sports car contraption. I guess it's sort of the successor of the SLS. Mercedes claim it isn't. I would argue that it probably isn't either, but that's how most people think of it. Personally, not a huge fan of the AMG GT. I don't really like the way it looks, and it's just a little bit too sane for my liking. The actual car itself, it's decent to drive. It's sort of very much how I think of the GTS. It's okay, but I mean, it's just average. There's no real redeeming qualities of the AMG GT. You know, does it drive better than the SLS? Yes, technically, yeah, it does handle better, but the SLS was way more fun and had a lot more power and was a little bit faster. Yeah, it's just missing the craziness of Mercedes AMG, which is a little bit of a disappointment, really. Of course, they did introduce the GTR version, which, as much as I don't like this particular version of the AMG, the GTR, a more track-focused car, very good handling car in FH3. It'll be interesting to see what that's like come FM7, but the standard car, not hugely exciting. Next up, we have the Ferrari California T, 554 horsepower, 556 foot-pound of torque, 3,813 pounds of weight. Second heaviest car here today, still weighs 400 pounds less than that bloody SL65 though. The California T, I actually kind of like the California T. Admittedly, this car has now just recently been replaced, or is in the process of getting replaced by, I can't quite remember the name of it, but it does look pretty cool. The replacement car. Of course, the original California really was not a looker and wasn't a performer and wasn't really a real Ferrari. The California T did address a few bits, and ultimately I do think the California T is a much better car than its predecessor. As far as engine driving it goes, it's pretty good to drive actually. It is a bit on the heavier side, of course, £3,800, not exactly a light car. That only puts it, I believe that puts it around the same weight as an Aston Martin Vanquish. So yeah, not the lightest car in the world, but it certainly isn't a Bentley Continental GT or anything like that. Yeah, pretty decent car to drive. There's no real issues or complaints I have. It's definitely better to drive than the previous generation California, which would have been a little bit more sideways and a lot less fun and not as quick. Yeah, a solid car is the California T, although personally I would much rather have this, the Jaguar FType R, 550 horsepower, 502 foot-pound of torque, 3,638 pounds of weight. For those of you who've been on the channel for a while, you may know I absolutely adore the Jaguar F-Type. This was my favourite car in FH2. I love this car, I used it all the time, because it was just so much fun to drive. Unfortunately, of course, when it comes to a motorsport game, being fun to drive doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be quick, but, I mean, a smile on your face is priceless after all. This car is very muscle car-esque, is the best way to describe it. Of course, as you'd expect, it's basically a British muscle car. You know, they claim this thing's a GT car all they want, but yeah, it is very much a British muscle car. It has a lot of power, rear-wheel drive, front engine, it likes to stick its tail out. It is a hell of a lot of fun to drive. It can go around corners, it can actually do corners relatively well. Of course, Jaguar does offer a couple more cars that are a little bit more cornering orientated, and if you want to go a little bit quicker and so on, you can buy the Project 7. But the F-Type R Coupe, it's just fun. It's just so much fun to drive this vehicle around. Out of all the vehicles here today, if you haven't driven this one, it is one that I would put on your recommendation list, along with one other car that we'll get to later. Anyways, next up we have another British car. This is the Aston Martin V12 Vantage S, 565 horsepower, 457 foot-pound torque, 3,671 pounds of weight. Well and truly one of the more mental Vantages ever made, this along with the GT12. Massive V12 engine in the front of a tiny little car. Admittedly, the Vantage S does come with a few interesting styling quirks I don't like. I like the carbon fibre on the rear end. I don't really like the lipstick it's got going on, but there we go. If you buy it in a colour such as this blue, it does distract away from that a little bit, and it does make the car look a little bit better. As far as this car goes, it is pretty decent to drive. It does have a bit of an issue getting downforce down. I wouldn't think this car would be particularly reliant on downforce, but it does drive like it is. So, you know, through the higher speed corners you will get a lot of downforce, and it will go through corners really well. Through the lower speeds it does have a couple of issues with just breaking loose on you. You know, if you put a V12 in a car this small, you are going to have those issues, but yeah. Just remember to keep the speed up. If you want a sort of car to take to high-speed racetracks, a bit more of a cruiser vehicle, the V12 Vantage may very well be right up your alleyway. Next up, we have the absolutely drop-dead gorgeous Alfa Romeo 8C, 450 horsepower, 354 foot-pound of torque, 3,495 pounds of weight. While those statistics aren't particularly exciting, out of all of the cars here today, this is the one I'd recommend to you the most, because I really liked driving this Alfa Romeo 8C. First of all, just look at it. Just look at it. It looks absolutely stunning. Admittedly, you know, the 8C is a bit of a polarizing car. Some people, you either really like this design or you don't like it. I personally really do quite like the 8C. I'm much more of a fan of the Spider, though. The Spider is one of the only convertible cars which I do think truly looks better than its coupe equivalent. But firstly, with the 8C, of course, you've got the fantastic noise. This thing makes an absolutely awesome noise from its V8 engine. And the other thing is, this is a damn decent car to drive in the wet. I can't remember how it drives in the dry. It's a bit of a weird one. But in the wet, yeah, this thing drives very solidly. It does have a decent amount of grip through the corners. It sticks its power down relatively well. It is a good car. This might actually be one of the better driving cars here today. it is absolutely solid. I really liked driving the Alfa Romeo T. While it is very, very expensive, yeah, I would say at least give it a test drive, see if you like it as much as I did. And finally today we end off with the Lotus Evora S, 345 horsepower, 295 foot-pound torque, 3,168 pounds of weight. This is the least powerful and the least torquey vehicle here today. Not the lightest though, which is surprising for a Lotus, because of course the Evora was made to be a little bit more of a general purpose everyday Lotus, and I believe this is actually a 2+2, if you can believe that. I don't think you'd ever fit in those back seats, but there you go. The Evora S, this is a weird car to drive. It has wonky handling, as I was experiencing here. The actual turning grip is very good. Like the grip you get on turning is good. The rear end is relatively planted, but the suspension is sort of soft and wallowy, and when it starts wallowing it chucks the car all out of balance. It really is a very, very weird driving experience, the Evora S. I would probably suggest avoiding it, or if you are going to drive it, put some better suspension on it, because yeah, it gets unsettled pretty quickly, does the Evora, which is a bit of a shame, considering, you know, a car like this, an everyday Lotus could be a very, very good idea. But yeah, unfortunately, the wonky handling does throw it out a little bit, which is a bit of a shame. Onto the times then, and it's unsurprising that the McLaren 570S is the quickest car today, going into 45th with a 121.809, fractionally quicker than a Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera and a 211 and a Corvette C6, losing out slightly to a Donkavor and a couple of the older generation supercars. Here we find most of our cars for today. The 64th place goes to the Mercedes-Benz SL65 AMG Black with a 124.323. In 65th place, the Ferrari California T with a 124.384, does beat a 911 996 GT3. The AMG GTS goes into 67th place with 124.514, interestingly actually slower than the SL65 Black, which is kind of surprising. The Aston Martin V12 Vantage S takes 70th place with a 124.691 thousandth of a second off of the TVR Sagaris, and it's actually quicker than the Aston Martin Vanquish as well, which was a different result than what we got in the Dry, I believe, where the Vanquish was actually slightly quicker than the Vantage. Moving down some more, in 75th place we find the Jaguar FType R with a 125.293, actually beats the Jaguar XKRS GT, which is kind of surprising. Also beats Porsche Cayman GTS, Mercedes-Benz AMG C63S Coupe, M6 Coupe. Pretty good result for the F-Type. And dropping down some more, in 86th place we have the Alfa Romeo 8T with a 126.218, which loses out slightly to the Mercedes-Benz C63 AMG Black, a little bit quicker than a Corvette C4. And finally for today, in 92nd place, the Lotus Evora S splits up the Hellcats with a 126.744, putting it in 92nd place. Anyways, friends, that is it for this episode of Forza Top Gear Laps. Next time out, we are going to be taking a look at some Super Saloons, so join us for that. Thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, farewell.